Not long ago, I put out a YouTube short illustrating a really important technique idea and something that you really need to avoid. Now, there are exceptions to this, so I wanted to clarify it in this video, but first, watch the short. Remember carpal tunnel syndrome? People used to injure themselves typing with bent wrists. That's why you see those keyboard wrist pads nowadays, which help keep your wrists straight while you type. When you're playing the guitar, having a bent wrist in either hand might not send you to the hospital, but it absolutely will affect your playing for the worst. Having straight, relaxed wrists makes your fingers naturally curve and move less, which makes them cooperate more. The whole idea here is we want to have our wrists as straight as we can, as often as we can, but sometimes we just can't. So I want to show you some videos from some of the greatest guitarists so that I can illustrate this point. So you might even notice with flamenco guitarists, when they go out like this with their wrists, they're only using their thumb when they do that. So, and there's a reason for that. Your fingers are just not going to cooperate as well when you do this. So like I mentioned in that YouTube short, this is how you injure yourself, literally. Like, so do it yourself. Take your wrist, keep your fingers totally relaxed, and just bend your wrist like that, and notice how your fingers straighten. Now, if you played like this, and I'm talking really about both hands here, it really can be a problem in the left hand for most people. I'm playing nylon string guitar, and that's what I teach and what I play, but you'll see guitarists doing this wrong mistake in any style, electric, it doesn't matter, all over the world, for all time. And this is such an important thing that's holding you back. So if you do this with your wrist, you'll notice your fingers straighten. And then when you move your fingers, they move as giant sticks like this. The entire finger will move. So you can just imagine if you were typing at a keyboard on a computer and you did that, you wouldn't even be able to actually type, right? So we want to transfer that idea of straight wrist over to the guitar. It's just something about the guitar, when we turn our hand over like this, it wants to bend forward because it thinks it has to reach so far. But when we do bar chords, that is an emergency kind of situation, so you will have to push your wrist out a little bit. Not great to do it. We can really overdo that. Try not to do it as much. When you go back to those situations where we don't need to bend our wrist, you got to get back to a straight wrist and always have to be correcting that. And you're going to see these guitarists in a second do exactly that. So if we have a big stretch as well, like this, see my wrist is bent now. Watch Andy Summers play that, his wrist is way out like that, because this is a wild stretch. We normally don't have to stretch that much, and that's good news, so that when we're done with something like that, and we're playing something quote unquote normal, we need to come back. So the problem that you're likely to have is that you will bend your wrist out when you need to, and time and again we'll have to do that, but you'll leave it there, and then you'll be working really inefficiently, and you can literally injure yourself that way. So you need to get really good at continually kind of getting back to the default position with your wrist, which should be straight whenever you can do it. Now, it might seem easy enough when you play on the treble strings to do that, to stay nice and straight with your wrist, but when you get to the bass strings, you think, oh, I gotta really reach over here so that I don't touch the next string. Well, so often it doesn't matter if you touch the next string. We don't want to get really sloppy though, but it's more about your knuckles. We want to bend at every single knuckle so that we can be clear of the string and not rely on our wrist to do it. So let's watch this quick clip of Baden Powell. Look at his left hand wrist and see what he's doing. So super, super straight wrist, and that's achieved by curving his fingers more. And notice how close his palm was to the guitar. That's really how we can achieve more wrist straightness. The further away that your palm gets, then we have to, or at least your fingers feel like they have to bend, or your wrist feels like it has to bend like that. Get a little bit closer, bend your knuckles more, and if you were playing piano or typing, right, that's how you naturally would be. It's just something so weird, like I said, about turning your hand over, then everything just goes haywire in our left hand. But this is so crucial to playing faster, but helps you play much more advanced material without getting fatigued. So we know that our wrist should be straight, but we can't always keep it straight. Let's watch the great Brazilian guitarist Yamandu Costa and see what he does. He's playing a 7-string guitar, so he has to reach even further. You're gonna see how he bends his wrist because it's an absolute necessity at that moment, and then he comes back to the place that we always need to be in. Before we look at the greatest flamenco guitarist to ever live, Paco de Lucia, and what his wrist is doing, let me give you a little bit of an exercise that can kind of push you into what I'm talking about. We're gonna play with your ring finger, the 4th fret of the 4th string, okay? And you might be blocking that string. Now we wanna try to not block it, so we're gonna play the G string open, and then that F sharp note, right? So how can we do this and keep our wrist straight? Well, we can force ourselves into it by getting your palm as close as you can get to the neck, maybe even lightly touch the neck. And we want to hear the open G string, right? So if you do this, chances are you're gonna have the right curvature in this finger, and make sure the other ones are curved too. Sometimes our fingers, if they're not independent enough, will be pointing out and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Keep them close to the string if you can. You notice how if your palm gets further away from the fretboard, it's gonna force your wrist out. So get close, like I said, just like Baden Powell was doing. He had his thumb over the neck a little bit, which is, it's okay. So if you do this, you're gonna be totally in the position. I think it's gonna really help you get the straight wrist that we're trying to do. So it's straight wrist. The whole combination thing here is the straight wrist, curved fingers whenever we can do it. Now let's see Paco de Lucia as he goes between places where he needs to bend his wrist. He's always coming back to having that relaxed straight wrist, and he's playing super advanced stuff, obviously. Let's see how he's doing it. So if you try that little exercise and just kind of sit and watch TV and keep in that position, it's gonna kind of train you to be in the right level of wrist straightness, let's call it. Now, I didn't mention, what about the other direction? We don't wanna do that either, right? So we're trying to avoid bending this way, but also that way. But there are exceptions to everything, right? So when you're playing a nylon string guitar, certainly classical players do this pizzicato thing. They'll bend a little bit out, not too much, right? But that's a special case. And then in your left hand, if you were gonna bring your thumb over, it might bring your wrist in, but that's also a way that you can injure yourself. So keep those wrists straight whenever you can. You'll notice when you get that habit down how you won't fatigue nearly as quickly as you normally do, and you can play more advanced stuff. What you definitely should not do is take your technique tips from Picasso paintings. If you want more technique tips, check out this video where I show you the 10 mistakes that you need to fix right now.